Okay, kids, it's time for another episode of the Fueled by Weird podcast, the only podcast able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. I'm Chris Daly, and today I have the pleasure of chatting with publisher for Wicked Tree Press, Jessica Maison. Jessica, how are you this morning?
I'm doing wonderful. I'm excited to be on the show and to talk to you about hopefully some monsters and Mary Shelley. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for coming by. And yeah, we're excited to talk monsters today too. So I'd like to start things off with an icebreaker question. I
Okay.
promise it's not going to be too tough. Well, I usually say that, but then it ends up being pretty tough. Um, if you were given the choice to have somebody narrate your life, who would you choose?
Oh, David Attenborough.
Oh, that's a good one.
Not tough at all. I just adore him and adore his voice. So yes. I don't know if
Nice.
it's appropriate, but I
Hey,
like it's calming, at least soothing,
that
reassuring.
works. Yeah, I think I would pick Keith David.
Oh yeah,
I
yeah.
he has incredible voice. I could listen to him for hours. That would
Oh, that's
definitely be my
cool. Yeah,
choice.
I like it.
All right, so with Fueled by Weird, um, the concept is basically, the stuff that you're interested in, the stuff you do when you're not doing, work or, everything else you're doing. That's the stuff that fuels who you are, the stuff that fuels your weird. So what's something that helps fuel your weird?
I would say this that I mean, it's kind of also related to David a little bit. I go into nature.
Oh, nice.
I'm into nature. I like to hike. I like to think about the natural world. I like to read articles about it. And so science, I think science fuels
Oh,
my weird
nice.
in general. It's not just nature, it's just science. I think if in another calling I would have been a scientist. So that definitely fuels my weird. I think that's probably the number one, which makes sense probably because I do sci-fi and horror, but
Very cool.
um that is like that's kind of my side gig. I hike every day and
Oh, nice.
yeah, not like crazy hiking guys. I'm not
Sure.
bragging. I just like hike with my dog.
Sure.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, you mentioned that you're a sci-fi writer and a horror writer. What was it that inspired you to start writing in the first place?
Um God, I I have to say it's probably all the reading I did as a child. And my mom was really into science fiction, which was weird at the time, I guess, for a lady to be into sci-fi. But she was always
Sure.
reading a different sci-fi book. I always watched a lot of horror, old horror with my family. And I think that kind of propelled me into being interested in those things. And then I guess the first thing I ever wrote was in eighth grade was a newspaper article, like school paper article about D&D. I was raised pretty religiously, and everyone kept saying Dungeons and Dragons was like the devil game. And I just couldn't understand why that was the devil game. And so I had a bunch of friends who played it. And so I interviewed them all and wrote this whole article about whether it was evil or not. So I guess that kind of stuff fuels my weird too. And that propelled
Nice.
me into enjoying writing. My teacher told me I was good at it, which always helps. And
Yeah.
then I started writing short stories shortly after. So
Very cool.
yeah.
Um, so I was doing some research and I saw that you've contributed to a couple of the Cthulhu's hard to spell books.
Yes.
Russell's a fantastic guy. I love that guy.
Yeah. Yes.
Um, you've got the stories for Cthulhu's hard to spell. You've got your series Plastic Girl, and then of course Mary Shelley's School for Monsters. Sorry, it's so early.
Yeah. I understand.
um, where do you get your ideas from?
Well, usually I hear something in the news, I read some article, I read a story, and I'm like, what is that creature or what is that? It's usually something I've read that sparks an idea in my head. And like with Plastic Girl originally, it was a short story that was kind of like the Blob, like because I always loved the Blob from the
Yeah,
sci-fi movies. And it was more that I read an article about the plastic in the ocean. This was way back, before I ever wrote the trilogy. And I just started thinking, well, what if this plastic started globbing together and became sentient? And then it became sentient and it became angry at its creator, us, because we created garbage and it's hurting everybody and it's mad that it's hurting everybody. And then it goes into this big thing. And then I was like, well, that was a fun story to write. I wrote it. I didn't do anything with it. And then years later, I was raising my daughters and I was like, oh, I have a better idea about this plastic creature, you know, and then that's where Plastic Girl came into. So it usually comes from some kind of article I've read and then just a weird take on it. For Mary Shelley, I was really thinking during the pandemic, I had been reading about Mary Shelley, and I always was kind of intrigued about how, you know, well, touched emotionally about how she lost her mother. She never met her mother. She died right 12 days after she gave birth to her. And she used to go to the graveyard and read her mom's feminist, you know, books by her mother's grave. And I'm like, to me, that was like such a physical, visceral, supernatural way for a daughter to try to connect to her dead mother. And I got kind of like just thinking about that moment in the graveyard. And it really just something I was like, oh, what if this is the moment she sees a cult, she comes in contact with a cult mad scientist for real. There's a Book of the Dead, the Necronomicon. She goes into this mausoleum. He's trying to raise this creature like the monster in Frankenstein. And so instead of Frankenstein being completely fabricated, it being like what Mary Shelley said, it was a vision. It was she always liked to say it was a vision. It was, you know, something she saw in a flash. Yeah. And maybe it was a repressed memory that she actually had. And it was based on this moment. And so she goes in the mausoleum, she touches this Book of the Dead, and it splits her into two parts. The one that goes on to write Frankenstein, and who thinks that was all like a bad, you know, she hits her head, that was a bad dream, a bad moment in her life. And then the one that is the monster version that stays with the book, stays with the mad scientist, who goes on to be our main character, Shell, who goes on to rescue monsters and kind of live forever and have a little bit of a grudge against her actual human self, but for leaving her in this dark mausoleum. But, you know, it's just kind of playing with what the themes that Mary Shelley played with in my way, you know, and yeah, so I don't know. Sometimes they just come to me, but they're weird. But yeah, so different ways like that. And then sometimes like with Cthulhu, they give a theme, and I do research, and whatever kind of catches my interest while I'm doing the research, usually.
Well, that's perfect. And you know, a lot of the most interesting ideas, at least to me, are the ones that come from a weird place. Just, you know, you have this completely off the wall idea, then you're like, well, maybe that's a little bit too crazy, but then, you know, if you just kind of embrace the idea and go with it, usually it ends up somewhere really awesome. So that's cool that you didn't let the inner editor thoughts take over and just let it go, because that's where I think the most interesting stories come from. Like your idea with Plastic Girl with the Blob and the old classic monster movies. And that myself, I'm not a huge fan of horror, but you know, I'm into the older classic crazy stuff, like the big monsters or like the Universal monsters. I really like the Universal monsters a lot. So that's kind of why I navigated toward this book, because I really thought it was interesting. Especially your take with having the ideas not just be like a bad dream, but an actual thing that happened. Because, you know, if you think about it in that terms, it's like, you know, every story that's ever happened, you know, it came to me in a dream, like, well, maybe it actually did happen, you just don't remember. So I thought that was a really cool take on it.
Yeah, thank you. I think our memory is such a fascinating thing. Like you can't really trust it, which is horrifying in itself. Like you base your whole reality on your memory. So the minute that is into question, I mean, that's not necessarily what Mary Shelley is about, but I find that whole fascinating, like that whole idea fascinating. Like when I think back on my childhood, you think back on all your memories, and the ones you decide to be the ones that you decide to make core. I mean, I don't know if you decide or your brain decides, but it's like, how much can you trust that memory? And some people are like 120% that the way I remember it is reality. And some people are like, you know, and those kind of people, I it's hard to talk to them because, you know, you can't, we all had a different experience of a moment. So yeah. And then if you actually don't remember something, that's a lot of horror movies are made about that too, even though, I mean, repressed memory, you gotta be careful with, because
yeah, for sure.
I mean, especially because when I grew up, there was that scare, you know, it was the satanic scare basically was going on, you know, and that was it applied to the D&D, but it also applied to daycare centers, you know, like these Satanists were like abusing your children in daycare, and, you know, they were like interviewing these toddlers, like, and just messing with their memories, like whether or not they actually, you know, and it became this whole thing. I mean, it wasn't crazy, but I do remember it and going, God, you can't even you can shape someone's memory too. You can change, especially at a young age, you can convince them that that's the way something happened or didn't happen. And that's nuts. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's scary. I mean, the satanic panic, that's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah. Well, Stranger Things kind of plays around with it. And
Yeah.
yeah, so brought it back. But definitely I remember being fascinated by it. I was a little fascinated by like all my stuff I was like researching when I was a kid was like, well, not a kid, but like teenager, was kind of like
Yeah.
what gets cults. It's probably coming from a religious background. Like what gets people so into cults? What gets them so into believing this hysteria? Like, people jump into hysteria really quickly, or group, not hypnosis, but group think, where the reality, they all kind of can convince themselves that, there's a haunting, or convince themselves that this guy's the god, and it's just,
Yeah.
or in that group. So I find that fascinating. I haven't written anything about that yet, but it is definitely something I'm fascinated in. So
Yeah, that's cool. And I was familiar with the satanic panic, with everyone being freaked out about D&D and how it's of the devil, but I
yeah.
never heard that about the daycare part. That's interesting. I think I might want to look more into that, because that's interesting. I didn't know it
Yeah.
went that far.
It was probably not as big as the D&D, but
Yeah.
it was existing. And I remember a few, like they were like investigating these daycare workers and stuff, that they had been abusing their children. And it was just, I don't know what it was. I don't think there ended up being anything beneath it. It was just
Yeah.
ruined people's lives.
Yeah, because you had it with D&D, you had it with
Yeah.
different genres. Well, not different genres of music, but different musical artists.
Yeah.
That was kind of thing. That's interesting though, that it kind of stretched that far. Um, that's very interesting.
It's off topic a little bit.
Yeah, hey, and that's okay.
Yeah.
We don't really stick to any kind of
Oh,
a super
good.
strict topic here. We're kind of, tangents are more than welcome.
Good. Good.
Um,
Good.
so I know you're getting ready to go to San Diego Comic-Con. Have you been before?
I have been as a professional, like I walking around, I've participated in a panel there. No, but I haven't been like done the booth and done the whole thing. So I've probably been to Comic-Con like 6 or 7 times, but this will be my first time just jumping all the way in. And I'm partnering on a booth with Russell, who's going to be focusing on the Cthulhu anthologies. And so I'll be in GO3 with him. And yeah, I'm pretty excited. I've got 2 panels that aren't, I don't know if the schedule is totally confirmed yet, but I'm going to do my, I've done this one probably 3 times now. It's like creation to concept, and it's a collection of writers and different writers from different genres. And we kind of do an intro and let the audience ask questions about writing. So it's like really, it's actually fun. It's very interactive, and good for like if you're writing and you have some questions about different ways to go. I find that one to be super enjoyable. And then I'm excited because I'm doing another one with a really great group of women about Mary Shelley and her contemporaries and Gothic horror. That's going to be on Friday. And we're going to be just discussing like how it still inspires today's writing, today's pop culture. But there was like 3 or 4 other female authors at the time during Mary Shelley's time who aren't as famous as her, but had just as like influential works, and so we're going to kind of talk about that. And I'm excited for that one too. So
That's awesome. Well,
yeah,
definitely make sure you tell Russell I say hello.
I will for sure.
Thank
Yeah.
you. So going back to Mary Shelley, when you were coming up with the book, how did you decide what monsters you were going to include in at least this first book?
Well, so part of what I want to do, what I've always been fascinated about, I've read a lot of mythology and monster stuff, is that there's just certain monsters or characters that I always feel like there needs to be more to their story. Like it feels like they got the short end. A lot of mythology women characters, like they get punished for some guy liking them, or they get punished for something ridiculous. Or like and that's like why I knew Medusa had to be in it as one of the team members. She is Medusa. I didn't just make her a Gorgon, and I'm telling a different version of her. Her backstory is different than the one that we know. That's a little creative license, but
Yeah.
I just didn't. I'm not going to tell it right now because it's in the future books. But
Right.
I wanted to give her a different ending. That was part of it. I want to give some of these monsters a different ending because I didn't like the ending. And I
Yeah.
guess that's part of being a writer. You can play God like that. And then with La Llorona, always loved her story. I haven't loved any adaptation yet of anything I've seen about La Llorona. And I always feel like she just is presented, she's tragic, and she, she is this wailing woman. She's cursed for all eternity because she drowned her children in real life. And I was like, well, what leads a woman to drown her children? Like, whenever I see a news story and a mother has killed her children, I'm like, how many steps of society failed that person before that happened? Like, women don't just drown their children. They might have postpartum. They might, can be a psychotic break. They can be under a lot of mental health stress. Like, there's just a lot going on. Like, I'm sure there's some evil, just ultimate evil women who drown their children, but like, usually I think there's a societal breakdown for why that happens. And I just wanted to tell a little bit more of her story and give her a slightly different ending. Not that I think it was okay for her to drown her children, but maybe as a monster, she doesn't have to be cursed for all eternity for something that wasn't all the way her fault, and so I kind of wanted to just give a little bit more depth into those monsters, not a black and white look. So since it is kind of a middle grade, light YA, I think it's all ages. I enjoy it. If you're going to target it as a group, I guess that's where you would target it. And it does have Anna's wonderful art and cartooning, and manga kind of influenced style, but then it's like, you can deal with the underlying trauma of these monsters. And it is important that they all have a little trauma, because Mary Shelley was full of trauma, and her trauma is important in the story. Like, just abandonment in general was a big theme for her, by her, in whether or not she was ever fully abandoned, but like cast away by society because maybe of her own choices. And just like how that plays into everybody. And so when the monster rescuers are going out, they're on a mystery, they're solving a mystery, they're having a fun, like Scooby-Doo-esque Buffy kind of adventure, but they are also trying to help fix the monster that they're rescuing, like at least send them on a path that's a little healthier. Like, they can't absolve them. Obviously, they're not absolving them. They know they did the evil thing, but it's like, where can we go from there? So that's why La Llorona was picked. That's why Medusa was picked. Will, who is a wisp, was picked because I love wisps and I have to have one. And Frank is a cool character. He's a he/they. And they are like, obviously, the inspiration in my story, they are the inspiration for Frankenstein's monster in her book, but the real one, and totally a different vibe, and a different style. And I had to, because I love that monster. So
well, that's awesome, because so I also have girls. They're a few years apart. My oldest, when she was little, I don't know if you've heard of Monster High before.
Love Monster High.
Right. So I learned way more about Monster High than most people know. And then she kind of got older and got out of it. Now I have a younger daughter who's getting into it, and they're kind of rebooting the series now to be a little bit different than it was originally. And the character that's based off of Frankenstein, or that's Frankenstein's daughter, they now refer to her as a they them, which makes perfect sense, because Frankenstein's made up of a bunch of different parts. We don't know if they're male or female parts, so that makes perfect sense. And I really like how in most takes of Frankenstein's this big lumbering monster, but your take, Frank's just a regular normal size person, which I thought was interesting. But I really liked that, though, just because Frankenstein's not always the big lumbering monster. Just that's just the way that, like you mentioned, the memory is of Medusa. I loved your take of Medusa, I have to say. My wife is a big fan of Medusa as a character as well, and when I showed her, like, hey, look at this version of Medusa, she thought it was fantastic.
Oh, great. Good.
I really like how you kind of made her the techie. Being an IT guy myself, I really thought that was cool. Do you have plans to introduce other monsters into future books?
Yes. So we're doing book 2 right now, and so we have 2 new monsters. I can't tell you what they are yet.
That's okay. That's okay.
We are going to Japan, so I can tell you that.
Oh, nice.
And so yes, and they're not always, so every book will have new monsters, and they're either being rescued or they're part of the mission. So, or they have been rescued and now are part of the mission, or they're part of Shell and Frank's past that involve Dr. M, because in each, like the way the books are working, or the way that we're doing it, is that there's the prologue, which is the back in time part that tells you like 200 years ago what happened, like how Shell and Frank met in the first book and came in contact with Dr. M, their big bad. That's their big bad, is Dr. M. He's inspired loosely by like Dr. Moreau. Very loosely inspired by that. And so he's the more arch villain with the, take over the world kind of mentality, whereas other villains in it are a little bit more nuanced. But so what we do is we do a single issue of just that prologue, and it for each one. So we did it, and they call it Origins. And so the first Origins was out. We did a Kickstarter for it, and that one is just a Comic-Con exclusive. That's just an exclusive that at events and for Kickstarter. And that kind of tells you what happened 200 years ago. And for each book, there's going to be a prologue in that comic that Origins. So Origins 2 will come out, and that tells you what's happening to lead up to our present day issue with this arch villain, right? And so that's where, so in book 2 we will be learning the next step of the story, and then the next monster rescue thing, which is a little bit more maybe personal for Shell this time. And and so so I'm excited about the 2 new monsters. I'd love to share them with you, but I can't quite yet.
That's okay.
But we will have 2 new ones, and the goal is, because we are focusing, the books right now are currently focused more on the missions, like the X-Men missions, versus the actual school right now. The school is a place. It is a place there. It's like their headquarters. But as we add new monsters and new students, then the school component will evolve in the story. You know what I mean? But right now I'm more into let's go there. The school has its purpose. It's a sanctuary. They train monsters how to operate more safely in society, and just like deal with whatever personal issues they have. But it's definitely, I guess I should have called it a rehab center or something. I don't know. But it's definitely a school, and there will be, but that part isn't the main focus right now. Yeah.
Right now you're in the recruitment process of enrolling students.
Yeah. And there are students, and you will have scenes, and you'll see the students. It's just a lot of times it's like you start at the school, and then we're like, oh, we have a mission, we got to go on it. And then we go on the mission. And that usually takes up most of the comic, because I only have so much money.
Sure.
Or I would love to hang out in the school all day long. But yeah, so but
they go out on the mission, and they may or may not come back with a new student.
Yep. It depends on how that monster feels about coming back. So
awesome.
They don't force them to come back. That's
sure. Yeah. Sure. So is kind of the idea of just, Mary and Frank and the team, or excuse me, Shell and the team going out and kind of giving these monsters like not really a happy ending, but helping them kind of resolve not really unfinished business, but kind of giving them kind of a closure to whatever trauma or issue they're going through.
Yes. It ideally, it's like you're not just rescuing them from the evil human who is abusing them or using them, but also you're in a lot of the cases getting them out of the curse that they're in, like, because they've been cursed for whatever happened in their human life. Not all of them. This is just for some of the monsters, but for this one in the first book, yes, like she's been cursed. She's been kidnapped and sucked into this video game and trapped by this video game program, by this technology that our team doesn't know how this woman has it or how she's using it. They have to get her out of there, and release all the children that are trapped in there with her. But they also, as they get into it, they're like, oh, she's got some more issues. Like, how do we get her uncursed from this? Like, hasn't she been punished enough for her deeds? Like, why does she have to keep being this evil thing that she doesn't want to be? Like, she's kidnapping. She had, like, every kid she comes into contact comes with her, is attached to her, and she takes it away from their home, and she doesn't want to do that. That's not like that. That's it. That's the total opposite of what La Llorona is. And and she's just being forced to live that out like every single day of her whole eternity. So Shell thinks that's very unfair.
Yeah.
And so yeah, the idea is that eventually you are trying, you set something slightly, you course correct just a little bit with that. That's the idea. You get a little
So
course correction.
so kind of not only are you saving them from the evil, they're saving the character from themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's cool. I
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that. And the ending you gave for La Llorona, I thought that was wonderful. I loved that.
Oh, thank you.
It was so good. So anyone who's a fan of classic monsters, anyone who's a fan of this kind of stuff, definitely should take a look at it. I know as soon as I get my physical copy of it, I'm gonna let my daughter read it because she's very, very excited.
Oh, cool.
So you mentioned that this was on Kickstarter and it did incredibly well. The art was amazing. The story is very well written. This isn't your first Kickstarter, but this, I think it said this was your second one.
Yes.
How I've never gone through the process myself. I know I have a lot of friends that have done it. And I've heard that it is definitely a task. What is your experience doing a Kickstarter?
Well, as I told you, I had some health issues this last couple weweeks, and I think it might have been directly related to that.
I've heard that's not uncommon.
Yeah, I was the first Kickstarter I did in October was for the Origins, which was this book, and it was my intention only to do that one. And my goal, I watched Kickstarter a long time. I'd participated in 3 Kickstarters as a anthology member, like the 2 Cthulhu ones and the Night Near Theater. So I had participated in that way with Kickstarters before, and I've just been watching a lot of the guys and gals that I think are really great at it. That's my school, like figuring out how to do it.
Yeah.
And then I decided I was going to do it because I think horror and comics has just a really great community on Kickstarter, and I would be mortified to miss them because I'm part of it. Sure. And so I decided to do the Origins comic, which was smaller because that was a little less intimidating. And I had a blast doing that one. Did pretty good on that when we raised like over $6,000 and had 214 backers.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And that gave me, it's a little nerve wracking because I had to I spent 3 or 4 years in general building up a mailing list, which is a whole nother thing, which I think is important if you're going to do a Kickstarter, or at least like a social media following. My social media following is not my strongest suit. So I have the newsletter, and it showed me that I could do it, which was good. And I had a lot of fun. I did a lot of quirky things. Like I had stickers, pins, soundtracks, giveaways and perks and everything like that. So that was great. And the fulfillment wasn't too hard either. I had a good time doing that. This last one was really great, but I hadn't planned on doing it. So I was a little more last minute about it. And that's, and credit to Russell, he gave me a hard time because I wasn't doing it. He's like, "Why are you not doing it?" And then I came home. I go, I think Russell's, I knew he wasn't wrong. Like when he calls you on something, you're like, "Oh, maybe I'm wrong. I should do it." Because I was just going to do the single issue Origin ones. Yeah. And so then I said, "All right, I'm going to do it." And it was great. It is a time. It is not easy. There's the preparation is one step. Then the actual Kickstarter is very intense. And I did have Blake Morgan from BuzzFeed help me on my campaign this time, which was nice just to have another person buzzing around about it, and helping me kind of just do some things that, I just wouldn't have had time to do myself. Yeah. And so he was a great support, great cheerleader. And, he was working on the campaign. So he was not just a cheerleader.
He's incredible at that stuff.
Yeah. And just keeping the energy going. And then it's just all the details, you're doing a metal print. You got to make sure you get the art. You got to do that. It is a lot. And for me, luckily, I have this particular book is finished that I just did on Kickstarter. Mm-hmm. And it's just a matter of getting the final copies from the printer and the vinyl. And then there's one I have all the stuff. We have the pins, we got everything made and done. Nice. It's just waiting back. The vinyl book plates were both Anna and I are both signing. So I had to mail them to Poland They're
Wow.
in, they finally got to her. It took longer than I thought, and she's going to try to sign them this weekend and get them back to me. So,
Nice.
I wanted to mail out in July. I didn't promise July. I wanted to mail out in July. It's going to be August, like I promised, because I don't think the book plates will be back in time.
Sure.
But we have everything else, so that's good. And so then you have to fulfill it, and that's a whole other thing. But I think because I ended up going on vacation while it was running at the same time, like I go on a family trip every year, which is just because I planned it a little late, and so I was behind. That was very stressful. So you have to be careful. You gotta be careful. Like, just, it can be very intense, and you don't realize how much you're on your computer, how much you're focusing on it. And I didn't even realize I was that stressed out until I was like realizing my body started telling me how stressed out I was.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah. And I was doing other things too. It was just too much. And
Yeah.
it's fine. But yeah, you do with Kickstarter, you have to like, and shows and anything, like, listen to your body, and it'll tell you when you're doing too much.
Yeah, for sure.
Eventually it will, for sure. Yeah. So
Yeah, if you don't listen, it'll definitely have a way to make you listen.
yeah. Yeah. That's what
For sure.
happened. That's what
Yeah.
happened.
Oh
Yeah.
man.
Yeah.
Well,
But
I'm glad you're doing better.
thanks. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
for sure.
okay. I'm okay.
Good. I'm glad.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you've got San Diego Comic-Con coming up. You've mentioned you've already started work on book 2. What
Mhm.
else is coming that you can talk about that you've got coming down the pike?
Well, let's see. So with Eradication, that's book 3 of Plastic Girl. I dropped the ebook in June, the same time I did the Kickstarter, which was the other reason I was very stressed out. And that was accidental too. The hardcover and paperback will be coming out in the fall. And then that trilogy is complete. I do have a fantasy, and it's a middle grade as well, a middle grade fantasy book that I actually wrote before Plastic Girl and Mary Shelley, that I'm returning to. So that will be coming soon.
Oh, nice.
And then I'll be as far as events. So I'm really focused on San Diego right now. It's the big launch of Mary Shelley, but
Sure.
I am going to go to the OC Children's Book Fair in October, and I think I'll be at LA Comic-Con as well this year. So
That's awesome.
yeah, so those are my next ones. And I probably and then Origins 2 will be coming in October. So most likely that will be on Kickstarter in October. Because I'm mainly, I think that's probably accurate. I'm not going to guarantee it, but I think that's the plan as of right now.
Sure. I mean, of course, it makes sense to launch a monster book in October, right? Just in time for spooky season.
I mean, I had so much fun doing it in October last year that I would be sad if I had to not do it in October this year.
I mean,
so
you just have to. You can't do a monster book and not do it in October,
No, and there's
if possible.
It's really fun on Kickstarter in October too. I mean, everyone's launching cool, spooky projects.
Yeah.
There's a lot of camaraderie. And you just get to see all the cool, creepy things all your peers are doing, which is great. And then there's a lot of readers and fans out there who are wanting to get something spooky. So it is fun. It's a fun time in October.
That's awesome. And I don't think I remember, or I don't think I knew that you did a story for Nightmare Theater. I know that was kind of when I started getting into indie comics, and I think my friend Dawn did one of the covers for Nightmare Theater. So
cool.
That's very cool.
The first one?
I don't remember. Don Nigan. I think
okay.
I don't remember which one it was.
Oh, Don. Sorry, I thought you said Dawn. I know Don. Don's great. He's like Don.
He's an incredible guy.
Yeah, he's a cool guy.
All right. Well, I don't want to keep you much longer. So we'll roll into final thoughts. What is a piece of advice that you'd give for an up and coming creator or someone who has the drive to want to create but is just afraid to start? What's some advice you'd give?
Well, okay, so if you've written or created something, my advice is to find a community who's also doing that kind of thing, whether it's online or close to home. I know when I don't do that, and when I didn't do that, it's a little harder to like create in a bubble. But if you haven't actually started creating and you're nervous about it, I mean, the only thing I can advise is you have to do it. You have to start doing it. So what I would say is find an anthology, whether it's short stories or comics, and look what their themes are. and try to do one of those. Just get your feet wet, get started with something small. I think that's like usually the best way to jump into something. Yeah.
That's good advice.
And go follow all the creators that you admire on social media, and they might have newsletters where they give advice, which is helpful too. I have a tendency when I want to do something is to find like some people who are doing it well and watch them, because you can learn you'll bring your own thing to it, but see what they're doing, figure out how they approach it. It might make you feel a little bit more confident to have like a roadmap of some kind, at least.
Yeah. That's good advice. All right. Where can people find you on social medias? Where can we stay up to date on what's coming from you?
On Instagram or Facebook, you can follow Wicked Tree Press. You can also look up my website, which is wickedtreepress.com, and check everything out there and join the newsletter if you want. That's the best way to stay connected with me. I am on Twitter, but not very often. So I'll just stick with Wicked Tree Press on
that works.
Yeah. I'm a Twitter tourist, I guess, is what I call myself.
Yeah, me too. I have an account, and I kind of, I'll doom scroll through Twitter, but I'm not super active over there.
Well, now everyone's jumping to all these other ones, and I'm just like, I haven't decided whether I'm going to do a Threads or not, because I'm like, isn't it just another? I know it's different, but it's like, okay, so it's connected to Instagram, Facebook, and I got 3 things connected to all 3 things, and I'm just like.
We could talk for days about Threads.
Yeah, so I haven't got on there, but I'm probably gonna go look at it this week at some point. But yeah.
And sorry, what were you going to say about Blue Sky?
Well, I haven't done Blue Sky yet. I can't decide, because I've tried all those, like I checked out all the new ones in the past, and now I'm kind of just like, I don't know. Do I want more social media in my life?
Yeah, it's almost like it's at the point now where if you're going to add more, you almost want to get rid of something else, but it's like, which one do you get rid of,
Yeah, and it feels like, I mean, for me, it should be Twitter. The only thing about that is I do like Twitter for comics. However, it does seem like all the comics people are shifting it. It's like, I feel like all the comics people want to leave Twitter, but they don't exactly leave, because they haven't found the place that's better, for that. So that's hard.
That's tough for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, for more about Fueled by Weird or for Geek Network, you can go to geek-network.com. That's our website. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at GeeksAZ or at Geek Network on Facebook. I am CD is Weird on Instagram. And like you, I spend more time on Instagram than Twitter. So we're just not even going to worry about Twitter.
Yeah.
The music for the show is by Polygon Horizon. You can check them out on Bandcamp and on social medias. The artwork for the show is by my friends Chris Chandler and Mike Belcher. You can find them on Instagram and Twitter. And if you like the show, please rate and review and tell your friends, because word of mouth is our friend. And remember, kids, to embrace the things that feel you're weird and always geek responsibly. Jessica, thank you for coming today.
Thanks for having me.